Hi, thanks for joining me to dig in deeper today. We're going to jump into Psalm 77 today. So let's get started. We're going to look at a verse in Psalm 119 and pray, and then we will start to read. And we're going to look at verse 32 today in Psalm 119. I run in the path of your commands, for you have broadened my understanding. Lord, I thank you that you have broadened our understanding every time we read your word, every time we dig in, every time we learn something new. God, you are opening our eyes, and I thank you for that. And I pray that that's what would happen again today as we read your word and look through it, Lord, that you will broaden our understanding, God, and help us to continue to always run in the path of your commands. Amen. So let's look at Psalm 77. We are in the middle of reading a series of Psalms written by Asaph. And we started with, I think it was Psalm 73, and there are 11 of them. So this is just, we're kind of in the middle of reading a bunch of Psalms right by Asaph. So this one says, I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night, I stretched out untiring hands and would not be comforted. I remembered you, God, and I groaned. I meditated, and my spirit grew faint. You kept my eyes from closing. I was too troubled to speak. I thought about the former days, the years of long ago. I remembered my songs in the night. My heart meditated, and my spirit asked, will the Lord reject us forever? Will he never show his favor again? Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failed for all time? Has God forgotten to be merciful? Has he in anger withheld his compassion? Then I thought, to this I will appeal, the years when the Most High stretched out his right hand. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago. I will consider all your works and meditate on your mighty deeds. Your ways, God, are holy. What God is as great as our God? You are the God who performs miracles. You display your power among the peoples. With your mighty arm, you redeem your people, the descendants of Jacob and Joseph. The waters saw you, God. The waters saw you and writhed. The very depths were convulsed. The clouds poured down water. The heavens resounded with thunder. Your arrows flashed back and forth. Your thunder was heard in the whirlwind. Your lightning lit up the world. The earth trembled and quaked. Your path led through the sea, your way through the mighty waters. Though your footprints were not seen, you led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. So this psalm is kind of a hard one to categorize, and it's interesting. When I looked in some of the commentaries, there's a lot of I don't want to say arguing, but just not a lot of agreement on the category for this psalm. One thing that I saw was that it was called a psalm of movement, because what it does is it kind of brings you through different sections to kind of get you to a place where they want you to be. So I don't know exactly, because I've got one commentary that calls it a praise for his attributes. Then I have another one that calls it a lament. So it's hard to know, but we're just going to call this a prayer of movement, and we're going to kind of walk through how it moves. Okay, so I'm just going to call it a prayer of movement. Because and then what you can do is I want to write over here how it moves. Okay, so it's going to go from a prayer for help, and this is where you get some of the commentaries saying a lament, and then it's going to move to distress, and it's a distress of remembering, and we'll see what that means in a minute. So a stress of remembering. So we move from those two things. Then the next thing it moves to is a bunch of questions. And then from the questions, it moves to contemplation. And then it moves to praise. So it's almost like it's taking us on a journey. So we're going to walk through and kind of walk through this journey. So verses 1 to 3 is our section of kind of like the crying out to God. So 1 through 3 is where we're getting the prayer for help. So I'm just going to write a plea. That's what this section is. I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to help me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night, I stretched out my hands. I couldn't be comforted. I remembered you, God, and I groaned. So we see a lot of urgency in the language that he uses. So let's just kind of mark some of these words. So we see distress. That's showing the urgency. He's stretching out untiring hands. And so that means it's kind of like constant, all right? Would not be comforted. And then we've got a groaning, and we've got a spirit growing faint. You kept my eyes from closing. I was too troubled to speak. I mean, it just keeps going. I mean, we see this theme of distress, of urgent distress. And so I'm going to actually write that down in this section too. I'm just going to write urgent distress, because that helps me to remember that's really what's going on here in this section. So it's interesting that in this psalm, you're going to see kind of a central theme that runs through the whole thing, and that is the contemplation, the thinking. There's going to be lots of words that talk about thinking, and so actually 10 times there's synonyms being used for thinking. So what we're going to do is we're going to highlight those, mark those, so that we've got those too. And it's interesting because the contemplating and the thinking causes the problem, but then it also provides the solution. So it's interesting how this all kind of just moves, okay? And we're going to keep talking about how it moves, okay? So verse 3, we have two of the thinking words. We have remembered, and we have meditate. So now here in this section, he's remembering God, and he's groaning, and he's meditating, and he's growing faint. So here we see more of the problem in his thinking, because he's thinking about like maybe what God did in the past and God's not doing it, or thinking about how bad things are, okay? But here he's saying, I remembered you, God, and I groaned, okay? So that doesn't sound like that's a good thing in that section. So now the next section, 4 through 6, just a real short section here, 4 through 6, we are again going to see his distress. And we saw a little bit of that in the first part. We marked a bunch of the distress already in the verses 1 through 3. But there's more in 4 through 6. So now we see, again, we saw this inability to sleep. So he kept his eyes from closing, too troubled to speak. So now we've got an inability to sleep and an inability to speak. Okay, and then it says, I thought about the former days, the years of long ago. I remembered the songs in the night. My heart meditated with my spirit. Okay, so there again, we've got all those thinking words, right? So let's mark all those thinking words again. We have I remembered, which we marked up above. My heart meditated, and I thought. Sorry, verse 5 is I thought. So we've got 3 more of those, the words of contemplation. Let's come up here, and where we see contemplation, let's just put a little, I'm going to put the pink circle up there so that I know that I'm marking all the contemplation. And then I'm going to also do that with the distress of remembering. I'm just going to put the green up there because that's what I'm highlighting in this, so that I have kind of a key for how I'm highlighting it. So then the next section is the series of questions. So he goes through just a series of rhetorical questions. So that's what this is right here. And I'm going to put the word questions inside here because I'm going to kind of make a little bit of notes on the questions. Okay, so what's the first question? The first question is, will the Lord reject me forever? So this is the concern here in this one is rejection. Then the next question is, will he never show his favor again? And so there's this fear of no more favor. So I'm going to write no favor. That's the fear that's happening there. So we've got a fear of rejection. We've got a fear that there's going to be no more favor. Will he never show his favor again? The next one is, has his unfailing love vanished? So this would be, again, this fear of no more. And remember that word unfailing love is hesed. So no more hesed, which we call unfailing love, that covenantal love. Then the next one is, has his promise failed? So there's this concern that his word will fail. Has God forgotten to be merciful is the next question. So now we've got this fear that there's going to be no mercy. And then, has he in anger withheld his compassion? So now we've got no compassion. Okay, so there's the questions that he's going through. So it's a series of rhetorical questions that kind of show like what's going on in his head right now, because we're talking about how he's meditating and he's remembering and he's thinking, contemplating, and the contemplating is going through like, where is God? If he feels like the attributes of God or the gifts that God usually gives to people is missing. And that's kind of the foundation of his relationship, that the Lord loves us and doesn't reject us, that he shows his favor and his unfailing love, and his word is true, and he's merciful and compassionate. We talk about the verse in Exodus, I think it's in chapter 34, where it talks about the Lord is compassionate and shows favor. And now he's looking, going, where is all of that? So we see just this questioning and contemplating and thinking. And the problem here isn't his enemies. It doesn't say anything about enemies. So the problem really in this writer's mind is, the problem is God, because there are no enemies in this prayer for help. So now let's go through and look at the next section. I'm starting with verse 10. And we've got, then I thought, to this I will appeal. I'm going to appeal to the years when the Most High stretched out his right hand. I'm going to remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I remember your miracles of long ago. So you see almost like a change in mindset, in attitude. Instead of remembering being a bad thing and the contemplating being a bad thing, now he's remembering what God has done. And so this section is from 10 to 15. And this is where he's starting to reason through the problem. So I'm just going to write reason through the problem. And again, we've got all those words that mean thinking and contemplating again. So we see he's meditating, he's considering, your ways are holy. What God is as great as you. You are a God that performs miracles. You display your power among the people. With your mighty arm, you redeem the people, the descendants of Jacob and Joseph. So we see like it just switches from contemplating and where are you, God, and all these questions to, here's the God that I'm serving. This is the God that I know. This is the God that is great. And so you can see this, like this period of contemplation that he had produced different thoughts in him, and the thoughts were of God's greatness. So let's first mark our thinking words, and then we're going to mark the things that he's seeing about God. So then I thought, so we'll start up here. Then I thought, there's a thinking word. And then I remember. And we have a remember again. And then we have consider and meditate. So we've got several of those, again, in that theme of thinking, what is God doing? But then all of a sudden, it's just this switch of praise. So let's look at what he's praising God for. He says, you stretched out your right hand. So here we see God moving, right? We stretched out your right hand. You are holy. Well, God is as great as our God. So you're a great God. You are a God who performs miracles. You display your power among the people. You redeem your people. So that contemplation of who God is and how God was working just turns into this song of praise of the God that he's realizing this is who the God is. So, and then we have our last section, 16 to 20. And this part too is also praise, but it's praise in a different way. It's praise to God, the Creator. So we're going to just label this section. We're going to label this section praise to the Creator. To the Creator God. Because he says here, the waters saw you, God. The waters writhe, the depths convulse, the clouds pour down. This is all because God is in control of the world and the earth and the land. The thunder heard, the lightning lit up, the earth trembled and quaked. I mean, all of that is how great God is. So he's recalling God's great wonders, almost as if it's a warning, like this is the God that we serve and this is what he can do. So you see this psalm move from like despair to worship, contemplating to remembering the great acts of God. And it even goes to the point where he remembers what God has done. The path you led through the sea, the way through the mighty waters, though your footprints were not seen, you led your people like a flock. This remembering becomes this song, where God is leading his people through. So I love this psalm just because of the movement. So it's almost like it speaks of this like theological crisis that this person was going through, and by contemplating on considering the Lord and the things that God has done in the past, they were able to work through those thoughts of, has God rejected me, or has God not had shown his favor? Because I think these are the things that a lot of times when we're going through a hard time, this is what we start to think. We start to think that God's rejected us and he's not thinking about us, and he's no longer showing his love towards us, and we feel like those things are gone. And yet this author of this psalm works through all that. He goes through his distress, and how he's feeling and what he's going through, remembering how God worked and feeling like God's not there, to considering the God that he serves and that God really is there. So what a marvelous psalm of just moving us through a time of crisis to a time of altering our understanding of God and being able to come back and worship because of who he is. And it doesn't say anything about the fact that whatever their crisis is or whatever the situation was, that changed at all. But what changed is their heart and their mindset. And I think that that's the amazing part, that we can come through a time of depression and difficulty and come through that with a changed mindset that worships him. So Lord, I thank you that sometimes you move us from the pleas and the distress and the difficulties through times of contemplating to seeing who you are and seeing how you work and moving from despair to trust. And I pray for anyone that might be going through something right now, that they'd be able to read this psalm and that their hearts and their minds would change to remember who you are and how you work. And that their thoughts and heart would turn to praise because of the God that we serve. Amen. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this psalm. Make some comments. Let me know what you're getting out of this. Thanks.